I think the revival of Doctor Who really has started to develop a monster problem. Outside of gag characters like the Ood and possibly the Slitheen, the only original villains since 2005 that have actually left a mark on the series are the Weeping Angels. Blink is one of the most critically praised episodes in Doctor Who history. The IMDb rating is the highest it has ever been since 1963, and if the BBC were to release a poster or an image showcasing their most iconic and instantly recognisable villains, then you know without a doubt they would choose the big three: the Daleks, the Cybermen and the Weeping Angels. Sorry, Absorblov. I think it's a testament to how good Stephen Moffat was as a writer back in 2007 and the Russell T Davies era that he managed to create a villain that has gone down as unforgettably iconic, not just in Doctor Who, but in sci-fi in general. And it really does show how culturally impactful Doctor Who was back in 2007, that he actually managed to succeed in making a villain this worthy of remembrance. But while the Angels have certainly been a critical success, the fandom are more often than not a very different kettle of fish. And in the 13 years since its release, Blink appears to be seen by the fandom as an overrated episode that has only got worse with time. There are a few reasons for this. For example, it has a near perfect 10 out of 10 score on IMDb, meaning it's most people go to for a great Doctor Who story, which the majority of other stellar episodes often go unnoticed. But the most popular argument nowadays is that after 2007, the originality and popularity of the Angels was abused in spin-off media and follow-up stories, leading to most people stating that they never should have appeared after Blink. But really, should they have come back? Well, yeah, in my opinion, yes and no. I think the pedigree of the Angels after Blink, both on and off screen, is the pure definition of a wasted opportunity. Some writers understand them, while others, even apparently Moffat himself, seem to see them as nothing more than a cash cow, a ratings grab, a marketable character. Let's start this by looking at each of the Weeping Angels' appearances and try to work out how these once phenomenal villains degraded in the eyes of the fandom, and then we'll try to work out what should have been done with them instead, and what could happen in the future, as the BBC are less than likely to give up on this gigantic cash cow. The production of Series 3 was less than kind to the episode Blink, as well as the fact it pretty much dropped out the sky back in 2007 with no promotion or teasing due to the fact it was sandwiched between two of the most highly anticipated stories of the year. And while this was one of the most well-received RTD stories, the marketing of the, or lack thereof, led to this receiving Series 3's lowest viewing figures. Blink felt more than set to be just another forgettable episode 11, which up until now, like episodes such as Boomtown or Fear Her, were just light fluff to tide you over to the finale. But you're probably curious why, out of all the Series 3 episodes, the story written by, at the time, the most successful Doctor Who writer, Stephen Moffat, be given what was perceived as such an insignificant episode. Well, it's because the episode wasn't originally assigned to him. Due to the incredibly strong reception to his previous two stories, Russell T Davies was determined for Moffat to work his magic and create another perceived masterpiece for the first two parts of the year, which was destined to have the most publicity out of the first half of the series due to it featuring the Daleks. But due to Moffat's showrunning, producing and writing the first and so far only series of Modern Day Jekyll, he proved unavailable to write the story. And Russell's second suggestion was the second two part of the year, which Russell suggested Moffat use the idea he pitched for the 2005 season, which featured the Doctor meeting a group of architects in the biggest library in the universe, only to discover it's being stalked by moving statues. Again, Moffat proved unavailable and RTD was close to giving up on him, but Moffat was a massive Doctor Who fanboy and was determined to write for the show again. So in a last chance attempt, Russell offered Moffat the Doctor Light of the Year, which he agreed to do, mainly because he thought if it were to fail, he could easily just blame the format, which had proved successful the year before. But as we know, Moffat hadn't quite burnt out his Doctor Who talent just yet, and Blink was a huge success, taking place in the public consciousness just as easily as it did back in 1963 with the Daleks. But you already know about Blink's tremendous success if you're watching this video. This wouldn't be a review if I didn't tell you what I think. Many people say that this episode should have stayed as the Weeping Angels' only appearance, mainly because of how well they portrayed this story as some enigmatic, hugely powerful force. And while I don't agree with that 100%, as we'll get into later, I can definitely see why. Blink stands up as an outstanding piece of television 13 years after its initial broadcast, and it would have been so effective if this was just a typical example of Doctor Who Monster of the Week hijinks, something which the show used to have as its bread and butter, mainly back in the mid-70s. I love it to bits for many reasons, including the fact that it demonstrates the perfect format for Doctor Who in its current form. I honestly don't know why writers in the current series don't use this story as a guideline for modern Who stories, as it is definitely one that you can only tell with the benefits of New Who. The pacing, managing to realise big science fiction concepts into low budget, mundane settings is perfection, and I adore the mixture of grey British everyday life with these gothic creatures and settings, brilliantly encapsulating Russell's goals with the revival to mix the everyday with the fantastical. The story is also so terrifying. I, like many people my age, went to sleep that night having nightmares about being trapped in Hull.
You're in Hull.
No, I'm not.
This is Hull.
No, it isn't.
I would absolutely love to see the Doctor Light format return, as this episode proves their success as well as being the setup for next year's Doctor Light Turn Left, which is another classic. While I love almost everything about this story, the thing it does best is what I think the Angels are well known and brilliant for, bringing Doctor Who into the real world. The scene at the end with the Doctor warning the audience about any statue being a real angel perfectly encapsulates this, but not in a way that insults the audience's intelligence. Doctor Who is infamous for inspiring people, especially the imaginations of the young, and that's exactly what the Weeping Angels do, inspire. They inspire you to look at a statue and think, is that alive? And then look at other everyday objects and do the same. Which is where we get back to the question of the video. Should the Weeping Angels have come back after this? I don't think saying the Weeping Angels should never have come back is a very constructive argument towards their later episodes being somewhat lacklustre, as they can be used in constructive ways that can explore themes of humanity and how we see the world. In my opinion, there should have been a middle ground between one-off and recurring, although they could still be great as either. Something akin to the Black Guardian in the Season 20 trilogy revolving around the Black and White Guardians. Another thing that the Weeping Angels are brilliant for is to be, amongst other things, a plot device to allow for character exploration. When the Angels send Kathy back in time, this affects Sally emotionally. We see how determined she is to find answers and make her friend's death more than a vapid attack. A similar event happens when Billy is sent back in time. It's not just a friend Sally loses, it's someone she genuinely could have had a future with. And we learn so much about a really small character, again demonstrating what the Angels are capable of plot-wise. Blink was more than just a classic standalone episode. It was also a showcase of what brilliant things the Angel could be used for, something that on screen was never properly used in, outside of a few small moments in later stories. A great example of what could and should have been done with the Angels on screen is the novel Touched by an Angel. A story like this on screen as a sequel or a potential second part of a trilogy revolving around their potential as villains would have been absolutely brilliant. The plot revolves around a man called Mark Whittaker who lost his wife in 2001 and has spent the last 10 years mourning. But soon enough he is caught by an angel and sent back to the early 90s, where the angels are taking advantage of his grief to manipulate him into preventing his wife's death, giving them a paradox to feed on. The premise is fantastic and is only something the Weeping Angels could be used in. So I previously mentioned the Weeping Angels should be used for scare factor that explores character, which is exactly what this book uses them for. But what is so brilliant is that the novel shows the potential of how good an angel story could be in the right hands. Jonathan Morris did an absolutely brilliant job with this novel, balancing great character work with genius and fun sci-fi plotting. He also truly gets the 11th Doctor and his companions. This isn't to do with the Angels per se, but I always love little details in the Doctor's character that remind us that they are truly alien. I mean, there are some obvious ones, but stuff like their ability to hold their breath for prolonged periods of time, or their body temperature allowing them to withstand extremely high or low temperatures, really helps cement them in my mind as an alien. There are several moments like this and more scattered throughout the novel, and it really helps to present the 11th Doctor as more of an enigmatic figure of power rather than the ditzy idiot we got in Series 7. I seriously recommend you read this book if you liked Blink or just weren't a fan of later Angel appearances. It's stories like this which help to create not so much a format for these villains, but a story type, similar to how the Moon Gaze helped to cement the capabilities of the Cybermen's returning villains. I think the main reason for the argument against the Weeping Angels returning comes from this lack of cementing the story types and possibilities that come with them. Let's take a look at why this happened in their second appearance, and what great decisions led to them degrading as villains in the eyes of so many fans. When he was given the reins to the show back in 2010, one of the first things Stephen Moffat did as showrunner was bring back the Weeping Angels in a style change inspired by the shift between the isolated horror story Alien and the more action-packed sequel, Aliens. Creative. This made sense scale-wise, as the audience probably would have been heavily in doubt regarding Smith's take on the Doctor. Some Moffat wrote a story that threw them in the deep end with a terrifying story and huge stakes, we have no choice but to cling to him as the Doctor. This, along with some other creative choices in Series 5, really cemented him as a proper Doctor. But despite the Angel's inclusion in this episode, which I'll discuss in a moment, the story still holds up as a really solid Doctor Who episode that shows with the new direction of the show, there is still time for these traditional Doctor Who stories, with classic based on each elements that would have been high on fans' lists to see stay between the shift between Moffat and RTD. But this isn't a review of Time of Angels as a whole, but if you want one, let me know. But of its use of the Weeping Angels, so let's start talking about that now. My biggest issue with the Angels in this episode is just how interchangeable they are. Outside the twist reveal at the end of part 1, and the opening the door by turning the lights out in part 2, the ideas added to the Angels lore could easily go to a different or entirely new villain. If you think about it, the silence could easily be in this episode. In fact, imagine a version of this episode with the silence in. The image of a silent is a silent, look them in the eye and they climb into your brain, they're impossibly strong, etc. There is nothing set up in Blink that really makes this addition natural. The only moment in my opinion that truly works is the twist reveal that all the statues are angels. It's genius, but it could have easily been taking place in a different Angel episode, preferably one that uses the already established lore of the Angels to tell its story. But other than that, and a few other moments, I mean really small moments, more or less just one at the beginning of part 2, the Angels could have easily been swapped with any other villain. I think it would have shown that Moffat was taking the show somewhere new and different if all the Series 5 villains, bar possibly the Daleks, were original. Because in my opinion, the Matt Smith era did not do very well with returning villains, often misunderstanding them or just seriously ruining them. In fact, it would have made more sense if the Daleks appeared once, and all the other episodes featured entirely new villains to become iconic in their own right. I know this sounds like a recipe for disaster, but if you look at the Philip Hinchcliffe era with Tom Baker, outside of the Daleks, the Cybermen and the Master, nearly all of his villains, in fact the entire run of Series 13, are entirely original villains, and that's considered to be the golden age of Doctor Who. In fact, I see no reason why this episode couldn't have just featured an original villain like the Silence, and then they reappeared in Series 6 to raise the stakes for the series finale. Would also have made sense due to the crack in time erasing people from everyone else's mind, giving the Silence a reason to feed in it due to it being an energy they're already familiar with. And that was that. The episode ends with a very pervy and uncomfortable scene where Amy forces herself on the Doctor. But in terms of episodes, after this, the Angels never really peaked again, as this episode killed their core appeal. Well, in my opinion at least. Most novels, bar Touched by an Angel, reduced them to plot barriers where they're just killed, easily, or defeated by technobabble. There are some Big Finish stories in which they appear, which I haven't listened to, but even if they're great, even if Big Finish were a second link, their mystique and intrigue was squandered for the sake of having a recognisable villain for this opening two-parter. Quite frankly, just lazy. And I know a lot of people really like Angels Take Manhattan, but in my opinion, it further diminishes the mystique of the Angels and the original idea set out in Blink. The episode, to be fair, the episode only could have featured the Weeping Angels, unlike last time, but they're just there to contrive an ending and some truly nauseating scenes between Endeavour and River. Nothing set up other than the surface level gimmicks are given full attention, and just like last time, they are beat by technobabble in the form of a paradox. Which doesn't make much sense. Isn't their whole point that they send people back in time and feed on the potential energy caused by the paradox of them not being there? Amy and Rory's exit does work thematically, but again, doesn't use the themes and ideas that the Angels come with outside the superficial idea of time displacement. And it's not really something inescapable either. As I mentioned, it doesn't really use the core ideas that Moffat created back in Blink. It's more of an accident more than anything. Do I need to mention all those god-awful cameos, which serve no purpose in the episodes they take place, and other than to make you think what you're watching is good, by reminding you of a time when the show was much better. So that was my opinion on what should have happened with the Angels after Blink. I don't think that they should have never been used again, although it would have been really impactful if they weren't. But I do think that something interesting could have been done with them. And I understand that a lot of people do like the Angels' later appearances, which is fine, honestly. They're nothing offensive, or even the worst thing Moffat did as showrunner. But I hope you can understand why I don't like them. While I do prefer the show to move forward and not rely on pre-established villains, there is nothing wrong with doing it occasionally, or telling new stories with older villains. Blink set out a whole new deck of cards for writers to play with, before Moffat decided otherwise and threw them away, seeing them as nothing more than a marketable cash cow, or a celebration of older, better, and more original stories.